All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us on our second award showcase, highlighting the work of our 2020 awards. I'm Barbara Hall, the Vice President for Awards for the Division of Distance Learning, and we're joined today by our first and second place book award winners. So this is how we're going to spend our time together. After I give a brief introduction to what we're doing here, then we will start with our first place award recipients. They will present on their work. We'll take 5 to 10 questions, 5 to 10 minutes of questions or comments that's specific to their book. And then we're going to move on to our second place book award recipients. They will also present on their book, and then we'll spend 5 to 10 minutes with questions specific to their book. And then at the end, after both presentations and some specific questions and chat, we're going to start to look at opportunities to see some themes or some emerging questions that relate to both of those books. So with no further ado, I would like to invite our first place award recipients to present on their book, Social Presence in Online Learning, Multiple Perspectives on Practice and Research, published by Stylus. And we do have a special discount code for that, and I will put that in the chat. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Amy Garrett Dickers. And I'm joined here with my co-editors, Amy Whiteside and Karen Swan. And we are presenting today and discussing our book, Social Presence in Online Learning. I'm Associate Professor in Educational Leadership at the University of Minnesota. Dr. Amy Whiteside is Associate Professor in English and Writing at the University of Tampa. And Karen Swan is the James J. Stuckel, is that correct?
Yeah.
Pronunciation? Distinguished Professor of Educational Leadership at the University of Illinois in Springfield. So we're going to talk a little bit about the book and the overarching format of the book and the layout with the 3 different perspectives that are discussed in it. But first, we want to give a thank you to AECT and the Division of Distance Learning for the award. We really appreciate the recognition, and we appreciate the good work of the AECT and DDL. Today, we're going to talk about the book, Social Presence in Online Learning, Multiple Perspectives on Practice and Research, and we appreciate any opportunities for conversation about the book, the research, and maybe the future of some of our research coming as well. So I'll start by providing a brief overview of the book, and then talk about part 1, and then my 2 co-editors will also talk about one of the major aspects of the book. So the book, Social Presence in Online Learning, really focuses on the teaching and learning process, specifically thinking about social presence, which has, of course, been emerging as an area of research over the past 15 years or so. And the 18 peer-reviewed chapters are a blend of empirical research, instruments, measurements, discussion around social presence, really thinking about different models that we use when we think about social presence in practice as well as in research, and then a discussion of some of the major conceptual understandings that we have in the field around social presence. The chapters in the book are K-12, higher education, and lifelong learning perspectives that are represented there. And in each chapter, there are some specific recommendations for practice, for instructional designers, for teachers, for researchers and scholars. So we've really tried to blend the research and the practice, and you'll see that as you look through the multiple chapters in the book, providing those different perspectives. Part 1, after our foreword from Michael Graham Moore and Charlotte Gonarwadina, I'm working on my pronunciations today, is really about an introduction to social presence in online learning. And it is one where in chapter 1, Karen Swan, one of our co-editors, provides that foundational history of the emergence of social presence as a field, really starting with Short, Williams, and Christie in 1976 and kind of tracing the progression of the history of social presence. Karen Swan situates the readers in the fundamental aspects of social presence and really outlines the way that the book shaped up. So the book focuses on 3 different lenses of study and conversation around social presence. The second chapter in part 1 provides some definitional understanding of social presence, really tries to key into some of those conceptual understandings that we have, as well as some of the theoretical frameworks and instruments that we use in the field when we're thinking about social presence. Part 2 talks about one of those 3 main lenses. So the 3 main lenses that we discuss in the book are social presence as technologically facilitated through computer-mediated communication, social presence as the learner's perceptions, in many cases, of those tools or the ways in which those technologies are being utilized, and then social presence as a critical literacy that's all-encompassing. So part 2 really focuses in on that social presence as technologically facilitated. The chapters in part 2 cue into the computer-mediated communication aspects. In chapter 3, Karen Swan introduces us. Each section of the book has an introduction to the section and provides some overview, foundational understanding, and then a little bit more about each chapter. Chapter 4, Lowenthal and Mulder really focus in on the history and the communication technologies that are being used, but they encourage us to think about those specific uses of digital storytelling, of video, of text messaging, of audio, of images, and how we're using those various communication media to engage the learner in the learning environment and in the teaching and learning process. And then 2, in chapter 5, really focuses in on this lifelong learning perspectives of social presence, thinking about personal learning, open networked learning environments, as well as the open education movement. So really starting to think about the different environments and the ways the technologies work within those environments for the personalized learning perspective. And 2, really focuses in on that self-identity and self-presentation of individuals in the learning space. So part 1 is the introduction to the book. Part 2 is this focus on social presence as technologically facilitated. And then part 3 moves into the second lens, which is this idea of the learner's perceptions of social presence.
I guess I'll take it from there. I'm Karen Swan. The chapters in section 3, as Amy noted, all approach social presences grounded in learners' perceptions. This notion emerged from the observations of educators actually working with students in discussions and bulletin boards, computer-mediated communication, who found their students perceive such discussions with each other as real. Thus, these early scholars co-opted the term social presence from the communication theorists who viewed it as a quality of the medium. The notion of social presence as determined by learner perceptions is central to the community of inquiry framework, which you may know, and which is probably the most accepted model of online learning in the world. What I really liked about this book is that its chapters are written by important social presence scholars who touch upon topics central to the concept. This section is a good example of that strength. It includes chapters by Lonnie Gunawardena, Jennifer Richardson, Patrick Lowenthal. Patrick, thank you for putting us up for this book award. Jessica Gordon, Phil Ice, and myself, and explores social presence in the community of inquiry framework, cultural perspectives on social presence, that's Lonnie, instructor social presence, Jennifer and Patrick, modeling with social presence, Jessica, and the seminal research of Wally Boston and Phil Ice, which found that social presence plays a critical role in student success. The chapters in this section thus represent a really good range of the research on social presence and student perceptions. They present some of the more vital findings in this strand, student perceptions, and provided direct implications for practice, as well as instruments and methodologies commonly used in social presence research from this perspective. Hopefully they'll be useful to researchers and instructors, instructional designers, and educators at all levels. And now I'll pass to the other Amy.
Thank you, Karen. In the last, or the third area that we had addressed in our co-edited book, we looked at social presence with a different type of perspective. And this perspective focused mainly on a critical literacy that emerged later. I come from an English and writing background, and literacies are sort of foregrounded in everything that I do, from rhetorical literacy to technological literacy. And the more and more that this incredible group of colleagues and I studied, the more that we really discovered that this is something that is essential to everybody as they think about learning as a instructional designer or a teacher or a student, is to really think about this as a critical literacy to be learned. This comes or is more foregrounded in Vygotsky theory, specifically in his social development theory, and in the principles of the zone of proximal development, as well as thinking from others' perspectives, a key sort of an inner speech theory that he has within the theory of social development. And the first chapter is sort of the seminal work that the others then foreground. And this is where the social presence model was derived. And in chapter 12, I go through in this particular chapter what it means to have a critical literacy. And I talk about literacies in general, and I talk about how I came to that perspective. The social presence model has 5 different elements within it, and each of those elements are important in thinking about social presence as a whole entity. In chapter 13, this chapter looks at professional development, a particular faculty professional development program at the higher education level. And it looks at the experience that gives those that are entering this program if they are foregrounded in social presence, and specifically the social presence model. Chapter 14 looks at a virtual high school program that ran simultaneously alongside a traditional program. And it really goes into the importance of blending education, which has become more and more important today. And Amy Garrett Dickers, myself, and Summer Lewis really talk about what happened in this particular case study, looking at it not only from a student perspective, a teacher perspective, but also looking at parents and administrators as well. In chapter 15, Summer Lewis, Amy Garrett Dickers, and myself look at the needs of diverse learners who might be recovering credit in different ways and may need social presence in ways that many of us can't imagine, and really delve into what personalized learning means to those learners. And then finally, myself, Amy Garrett Dickers, and Summer Lewis look into overcoming that isolation that many students and sometimes instructors can feel online, and giving a number of tips and tricks to help in that process. And then the final part of the book we look at in terms of concluding thoughts. Jason Vickers and Peter Shea give an incredible chapter in chapter 17, looking at future directions in social presence. And they talk about different emerging technologies and this theory of an ecosystem and what it means for us in terms of social presence going forward. And finally, myself, Karen Swan, and Amy Garrett Dickers, who I have been so blessed to work with on this project, looked at a concluding chapter noting the future of social presence, advancing research, uniting the perspectives, and allowing innovation in practice, where we really came to see where in the beginning I can remember Karen saying, oh, well, you have this, there's this perspective, there's the learner's perspective, there's social presence as a critical literacy. But in the end, we found out that we had many more similarities than differences, and talk through that in this final chapter, in chapter 18. So thank you so much. At this time, I'm going to turn it back to Barb.
Yes, thank you very much. It was very interesting to learn more about your perspectives, and that was an excellent overview of the book. I have a couple questions, in some that were submitted ahead of time, but I also invite you, if you have any questions or comments for the book, you're welcome to put those in the chat now, and we'll make sure that we call those out. So I am wondering a bit, and you guys can decide who's going to take a shot at this. How do you think social presence has changed in the time of COVID-19?
I can only think that it's become more important. That all of a sudden we're seeing a ton of people suddenly discovering that you need to have an affective part of what you're doing, and you can't just go online without it. And so I think I haven't really seen people using the word social presence, but it's what they're talking about. And I think it can only get more important as we go forward.
Thank you.
I agree with that. And I'll just say too that I think in some ways in this giant shift we've all had to initially to emergency remote learning, that in the crossfire and trying to navigate different modalities and all the the social circumstances surrounding COVID-19, I think a lot of the fundamentals have been missed in terms of even when you have a face-to-face crew in sort of a high flex situation, and you're trying to connect with learners on Zoom, you still need to say hello to them, and you need to greet them, and you need to be connected with them. And connectedness is such an important part of teaching and learning, and it becomes even more important in a situation like this.
It's a great point about the greetings. Please go on, Dr.
That's fine. I'll just say I been at my institution with Sherry Conklin, who's a faculty member in IT. She and I have been kind of researching the perceptions and perspectives of students and instructors at our own institution during the shift to remote learning, as well as in this year of hybrid. What does it mean? Who's doing what? How are we, with my chancellor thinking we're going back to normal, but we're not quite there, whatever normal is these days. And I will say there was one faculty member last week at a presentation that we did for my college who said, Amy, I know you've been saying this for a while, but I feel it now that it really is important to build community, and it takes effort on my part to make sure that I'm connecting with them and helping them feel connected so that I feel more engaged in my own teaching. So it was a kind of eye opener. He's like, I know you've said this to me many years now, but now I actually have been in the middle of it and I know what it means, and I agree with you. So I'm like, yay, we got a convert. So
Oh, awesome. Well, hopefully we have a lot of converts between how things ended last spring and a whole year for those who continue to do remote learning, emergency learning, whichever form of it you did. Hopefully we have some converts. I was reminded of intersubjectivity, sort of in social presence, in terms of, learners building on one another in terms of that social, not just constructivist with a B, but social constructionism with an N. And that's what kind of stood out to me a little bit, is how I think, Dr. Whiteside, you mentioned sometimes or maybe it was you actually, Dr. Swan, now I don't remember which one, talking about the fact that that's what we're talking about, even if we don't know to call it social presence. And so the idea of that, the need for social presence to build towards that intersubjectivity as a benchmark for quality learning really stood out to me as well. And I think that this book is going to help a lot of folks get there. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Then I do want to point out in the chat, thanks to Stylus, the publisher, for offering a discount specific to this event. I have been posting that in the chat as new people join us. They don't see what was in the chat before, so you have to post new stuff for them to see it. Oh, terrific, Tony. And he's coming right up. Thank you, Dr. Petrus. The code, in case you were only hearing and not able to see the chat, the code is AECTSP, so AECTSP for social presence. And that code does expire on June 7th. So get your discounted copy today. It's on the screen. I know that. All right, then. Thank you all so much. We're going to let you bow out while I get folks started for our next. So we have Dr. Petrus and Dr. Martin. I have to find you all in the chat. There we go. All right, now we have just concluded, for those of you who joined us late, we just concluded our first place award recipients sharing about their book and 5 to 10 minutes of questions and comments specific to that book. And now we're moving on to our second place book award recipients for 2020. And as with the others, as with first place, they will introduce themselves, offer a short presentation about their book. We'll talk about their little book, talk about their book for a little bit, and then we'll talk about some themes or emerging questions between the two of them. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, DDL, for inviting us to present our book today. My name is Florence Martin. I'm a professor of learning design and technology at UNC Charlotte. And a past president of DDL. So I'm definitely excited to be here to share this with the other DDL members.
And I'm Dr. Anthony Beatrice at SUNY Potsdam, and it was a pleasure working with Florence on this project, and we're very happy to be here today.
So I have to tell a short story how we got started on this book. So along with being a past president of DDL, I was also a past president of MPD, which is Multimedia Production Division. And Tony was a past president of MPD. And so was a third person who's Dr. Bill Sugar, who's not on the book, but I think he was one of the driving forces behind us writing this book. And he was a past president of MPD as well, Multimedia Production Division. And, you know, one of our casual conversations, we discussed the need for a new book on multimedia. That's what, you know, the division was about. There were a few books on e-learning, good books, some were outdated, but then, you know, the mayor's book is still being widely used, the one on science of instruction, but we were looking for something more broader. So the conversation came from AECT, and we had a contract with Springer. Unfortunately, Bill couldn't continue on the project because of some health issues, but then Tony and I saw it through completion. So this is the book we're going to talk about today. And the foreword was written by Dr. Abby Brown, who I saw had just logged in. So thank you, Abby, for doing that for us. So initially we debated on what should we call this? You know, we use the term multimedia widely, but then we were writing this book, we decided to use the term digital media because we thought multimedia was a little outdated, and digital media kind of captured a lot of the topics we are including in this book, or we included in this book. So we titled it as Digital Media for Learning. And you can see how we also included theories, processes, and solutions. So we focus on the theories, processes, and solution. And this was not an edited book. So between Tony and I, we have 8 chapters. So we just divided up the writing. And so the audience, so we were hoping for this book to be used as a textbook, at least we do at both our institutions. So one good thing about Springer is, you know, our libraries have access to the Springer databases a lot of times. So students have been able to access it for free. even though we were not happy that the book was priced really high, but students have been able to get the ebook version literally for nothing. So because of that, we are definitely excited, and it serves its purpose that students are being able to use it. So the audience was higher ed faculty, instructional designers, e-learning specialists, graduate and undergraduate students, e-learning vendors, even in K-12 technology coaches and facilitators can benefit from it. So to maintain consistency in the book, each of the chapter has an abstract, chapter objectives, keywords, best practices, supporting research, reflection questions, summary, and a professional practice case study. So that's something we're excited about. Every chapter has a case study that's connected to it, which is something we didn't write. We invited folks to write, and we gave them credit for it. So it's usually 1 or 2 pages at the end of each chapter. Purpose of the book, again, so broadly, it's about applying instructional design principles and practices, research, showcasing research-based practice, and the professional practice case study, which I mentioned, how, you know, this particular digital media is being currently used, or particular theory or process is currently used. And then also we provide some resources for practical application. If you want to do this, how do you do it? So there's an example, a screenshot, like for example, how Mayer's design principles is being used in financial training. So when we submitted this for DDL, you know, we were thinking whether it was a good fit, but you know, we are a little bit more broader, unlike our previous presenters, which is directly, you know, on online learning. So ours captures both blended and online learning, I want to say, but then in the broader aspect of distance learning, all the topics are directly relevant. So here are the eight chapters that we wrote. The first section is on theories, developmental models, and the principles of learning. So those are the 3. And we have a screen for each chapter. So Tony and I are going to walk you through what we included in each chapter. So Tony, before I go into the chapters, if there's anything else you'd like to add?
Keep on trucking.
Okay. So the first one was an introduction to digital media for learning. So we want to set the stage again. You know, we wrote it so that even somebody who's really new to digital media can still benefit from this, whereas experts can also use it. So in this chapter, we started from definitions. We gave best practices, benefits, challenges. We talked about digital media competencies. So all that went into this chapter on introduction. And then the second chapter is a broad chapter, you know, and we all teach multimedia courses. So, and you know, my experience, I've used so many different chapters and books and brought it together when we were teaching multimedia design theories and principles. So in this, we decided with one chapter, they can get all of it. So it's more like a summary chapter. For example, we talk about Mayer's principle, Robin Williams design principle, Linda Lohr's graphic principles, and universal design principles. We also talk about, you know, the cognitive theory of learning. So all this is packed into this particular chapter, definitely a rich chapter. And then the third one is we wanted to write about models and processes, because there's just not one way to do digital media design, right? So we started with ADDIE, but then we also went to the software industry. We looked at some waterfall models, spiral model, rapid prototyping model. Again, so we looked at several models, 7 to 8 models we reviewed that you could use in your digital media development. So that was chapter 3. And go ahead, Tony.
All right, so let me just first comment on the first 3 chapters that I have used these with some different classes. I've used them with instructional designers who are in our instructional design program. I've also used them with sort of traditional teacher education students, as well as some non-teacher education students. And my overall reaction, and while I did sort of help with these chapters, this is really Florence's deal. She did a great job on them. I mean, I kind of said, hey, include this model and we ought to do that. And so there was definitely collaboration, but kudos to Florence on these first 3 chapters. They have been so well received. The idea that these principles are all consolidated into a relatively short grouping for new people who are being introduced to design principles for the first time, or theories of how these things should be applied. Many people have never even been introduced to the idea of iterative design, for example. So the idea that there's multiple ways to approach it, and they've heard some of these terms floating around, it's done an amazing job for those people of just consolidating things together. So before I move on to my chapters, great job, Florence, on those first 3 chapters. And when it comes to the last few chapters, really these were based on courses we teach. So I kind of was, I mean, no offense to any of you who do or don't buy this, but if none of you buy it, it's still going to be useful to me. That was my sort of takeaway, Florence, is like, if nobody does anything with this, at least I'll be able to use it in my classes. So I teach a class in instructional video. So I took kind of everything that I've taught for the last 25 years in video and consolidated that into a chapter. I've been teaching simulations and games in a similar way for the last quarter century. And I said, all right, let's pile that together. Shout out to Dr. Bob Appelman for allowing me to teach F401 Principles of Multimedia in 1995 when I was a graduate student at Indiana University, kind of getting my feet wet with these topics. And then finally, an emerging learning technologies class that I've been teaching lately that's been a lot of fun. And then we threw in some mobile learning and online learning as well as possible solutions. So with the video chapter, I think that before I talk about, I'm going to talk about all the chapters for a second, the last 5. There's an automatic risk when you're talking about media of writing it in a way that it's outdated the second that you write it. And we were very conscious of that. So one of the things we tried to do was to write it in a way that would obviously be grounded in theories and processes. That would give it a little bit of a timeless nature. Obviously, those do progress and update, but they don't necessarily move at the light speed that video does, for example. But there are principles of video that are grounded and historical, and we tried to bring those in and tried to frame our approach to modern video in a way that was grounded in the past, so that when it comes time to update it, or let's say this is used in a few years and they're looking at an application of what we wrote to new technologies, for example, we did not tackle filming in virtual reality, which I talked with some people at the University of Pennsylvania, and they're actually going into museums and they're doing 360 video, and they're talking about how do you guide people's attention when they could be looking in any direction whatsoever. Do you do it with spatial audio? Do you do it with fading out parts of the screen you don't want them to look at it? So there are techniques that are being generated now that we'll probably have to update if we update this. But again, we tried to write it in a way that would be as timeless as possible. And so at least a large chunk of the chapter wouldn't need to be rewritten. It would just need to be updating the sort of newer tables. Like, for example, that 4K, we probably need an 8K, one that's superimposed up around it. So without going into detail in the chapters, that was our general approach. Let's look at 5, Florence. So simulations and games is probably the nearest and dearest to my heart. And so we tried to integrate a number of different things here. I have to say, having been like seeped in this research for the last, as long as I can remember, one of the biggest problems is terminology. So we tried to define terms from the beginning. It's amazing how fluid the simulation and game terms are used. They're almost interchangeably. And the notion of a simulation game is probably rarely used, but it has definition in certain places. So I think with all of what we presented, we would say, here is a good way of looking at it, but don't be surprised if you see it talked about in other ways in other places. I mean, as early as the title of our book, we had to deal with that with digital media versus multimedia. Are they synonymous? Are they different? You know, what do they mean to different people? I mean, heck, our whole field suffers from that. Are you an instructional designer or you're an educational technologist? Are you an instructional design? Is it the definition of educational technology, or is it the definition of instructional technology? Depends on what year it was written. So with that in mind, you can't write everything in terms of caveats, but we did try to present it in a way that people wouldn't say, oh, that's not the way I learned it. Well, that's okay. There are different ways to approach it. So yes, this is one of my favorite chapters, and I'm teaching my Sims and Games class this fall. It's the first chapter that I have everybody read, and then we sort of branch off from there. And it's been, I think it's been pretty well received. Not tooting any horns or anything, but it's one of my favorite chapters. So thank you, Florence. Let's go to the next chapter, chapter 6. So this one I'm going to turn over to Florence, because this is Florence's. You've done a lot with online learning, Florence. If anybody follows Google Scholar, which I do with Florence, alerts popping up left and right Super active, and we were fortunate enough to have a nice consolidated version here in this book.
So Tony and I actually co-wrote this chapter together. So I cannot take all the credit.
Oh, I will give you more credit than me in this one.
So what we did in this chapter is, we can't write all about online learning in one chapter. So the focus of this chapter was on digital media for online learning. So, very specific. And we actually wrote about 4 or 5 things. So we talked about online learning delivery methods. So, digital media and asynchronous platforms is going to be different in synchronous. So we talked about that. We talked about creating and integrating learning materials, specifically like reusable learning materials. We talked about learner interactions. We talked about lecture capture tools, interactive media. We talked about LMSs with digital media storage, plugins, third-party, software tools. And then we also talked about different standards directly relevant to digital media and online learning, like, ID standards, media design standards, technical standards, and accessibility standards. So a very, very high level overview, but then digital media for online learning.
Yeah, and Florence, we'll be using this in the first week of the first session of our distance education graduate course this fall. So each of these chapters, I don't know if you could build a whole course around any one chapter unless the course was that overview of digital media for learning, the old multimedia class, so to speak. But a course on online learning would definitely benefit from having this sort of early on, just like the simulations and games in the video chapter. All right, so the next one is, I think, mobile learning. Is that right?
Yeah. And and I think this also was kind of, I think I took the lead, but Tony definitely supported me on this. Tony is like definitely the technology expert. I'd taught classes on mobile learning before and done a little bit of work on research on mobile learning. So we talked about designing and developing mobile websites versus mobile applications, mobile devices. We talked about design guidelines when you build mobile instructional material, which is not the same, right? When you build for, even though the phone sizes and the tablet sizes have gotten bigger, I think there's some design guidelines specific to these size devices. And then we also talked about developing mobile applications or native applications. We talked about that. We got to interview an expert who works actually at Tony's institution, and he gave us a lot of rich information to include it in this chapter, especially on like Apple apps and creating profiles and certifications and all that. So definitely we went a little bit more technical on this. So that was mobile learning. And then the last chapter.
I know. This was my favorite chapter to write, I have to say. I didn't really understand how deep the thread of futurism it was embedded in our culture from a very, a long time ago. You can see on the left, it's actually French, but so still okay. Around the end of the 19th century, you started to see things like H.G. Wells and the birth of science fiction literature. It happened around the end of the Industrial Revolution, this notion of how technology can interface with our lives, sort of early steampunk type things. So it's interesting, but if you're in this space, and now, by the way, the Multimedia Production Division is now the Division of Emerging Learning Technologies. So DELT is the name of the new division for AECT. And I think it speaks to what people are interested in is the application of these newer technologies in learning spaces. And it's a very challenging space. So this one, I guess you could say it's a history of learning technologies and how they emerge combined with the sort of the newest technologies that we could write. It was also, as much as it was the most fun to write, it was also the chapter that could get most easily outdated, like instantly. So for example, I would have put the Quest 2 in there as a possible virtual reality tool, with a major caveat that right now there's no institutional accounts for it. But at the time, all we had was the Rift, and you can see the kid in the middle chapter walking the plank, so to speak, in virtual reality with his classmates looking on. It was a very social experience. And you don't necessarily need everybody to be in VR for people to experience VR together. Not that VR is the only advanced technology. So I expect major innovations in virtual reality, augmented reality, and artificial intelligence, and we'll have our work cut out for us in this emerging learning technologies. We may actually have to start splitting off some of what are like consolidated in here into their own chapters. For example, there might be a whole chapter on XR, which is sort of the combination of augmented reality and virtual reality. But yeah, that is the end of the book. Florence, I do want to do a little shout out to my class in my emerging learning technologies course this semester. So this is sort of a tie-in. This is not planned, but in terms of social presence in learning spaces, I was part of the Beyond Zoom XR conference, and I volunteered my class to set up a virtual happy hour, social hour at the end of day one, so that we could experience each other in a sort of more authentically interactive way, using online interactive avatars that had like really detailed facial expression in a platform called Glue. And we gamified the space by adding some game-based learning to it with some simple ways of encouraging socialization within the space. And that session went over great with the XR folks, the Beyond Zoom people. I'm now on the planning committee for the next Beyond Zoom conference, and we are presenting, my students and I, at the ILRN conference on Wednesday in a showcase of what we did in the Beyond Zoom conference. So I'm giving a little shout out to those students, and there really is some amazing things that you can do to connect people in a very visceral way. So what we are presenting about is just how compelling the virtual reality platform is for connecting people in a social way. So anyway, there's my sort of teaser for the tie-in conversation we're about to have. Oh, and I guess the last slide, we did get second prize in a beauty contest, and no offense to my first prize people, but there's no card of Monopoly for you. So congratulations to you nonetheless.
So just one quick thing. So I don't teach the multimedia course regularly, yeah, we still call it as multimedia development at UNC Charlotte, but we have an adjunct faculty who teaches it. And once he used it the first time, he definitely thanked me. He said, "Thank you for writing this book, because students now no longer have to buy 3 books. You've definitely brought it together, and they also get it for free now through the library." So in the end, you know, it was a long process, took us a couple of years or more than a couple of years, but I think it was worth it. Over to you, Bob.
Well, thank you all so much. Congratulations again for earning second place in the beauty contest. That's actually, you mentioned the library, Dr. Martin. That's a great tie-in to one of the questions in the chat about my university actually doesn't subscribe to Springer Access. Any other tips for finding a less expensive option? And you know, that really is a question for both teams, but we're going to let spend some time talking about just the second, and then I'll let the second team come back after we focused a bit on digital media. So what do you think, Drs. Martin and Petrus? Any ideas?
Unfortunately, even the ebook is priced high. So that is one thing I've been very disappointed with Springer. Will I write a book with them again? Probably not. Because even if they initially priced it, you know, we were not supportive of that, but they just went with it. So if you're a large school and you have the Springer Access, I think several schools have it, but we cannot assume that all schools will have it. If they have it, then students can really access it for free, or, you know, for much cheaper, even if they want to get the print version. Otherwise, the book is definitely expensive. Maybe chapters, you know, you could buy by chapters, or just assign, because again, you know, this is a book, 8 chapters, but not all 8 chapters will fit in a course. You could use it in different courses, so that might be another way to use it.
Thank you. Dr. Petrus has offered some other options. Can you speak, Dr. Petrus, what you mean when you say if you have Springer Access, you can purchase a soft cover for $25?
That's right.
The question was, what if you
have a friend who has Springer Access, they could purchase it. Basically, at the portal through Springer Access, when you download the book, there's a link that says you can buy it for $25. That's only available to Springer Access customers. Yes.
All
and
right,
it's
so again, if you don't have
a maze
Springer
of
access.
publishers. Yeah, it's a maze of legalities, and honestly, as first-time authors, we probably didn't read the extra fine 4-point print as well as we should have, because they assured us they would give us a book in the $30 to $40 range, which for years we said over and over and over, it's critical. We have an inexpensive softcover version for our students, and at the end they're like, sorry, the price is done. We can't do anything about it. We're like, okay. You know, it's like welcome to corporate world for a second. So
You know, one of the questions I always ask for both is what are some of the lessons learned? So we got yours, check.
if you want it for sure, put it in writing.
So for well, let me stick with this one here. Okay, so you meant, well, chapter 8 was about emerging learning technologies. And so one of the questions I had is, if you were to write another version of this book, what additional media do you think you would include? And for everybody on the call, you're welcome to type into the chat as well, what additional media do you think they should include? And what are some we might not have even thought about yet? I guess you kind of have to.
I guess
Like, what would you like to see?
I'll start with Neuralink. So since we wrote the chapter, there was no such thing as Neuralink. And now Elon Musk is playing with the technology that you can use Neuralink, where it directly connects electrodes into your brain, and your thoughts can be connected to other people with the Neuralink in a way that you can seamlessly communicate without talking.
So I would say one thing we didn't focus on is social media and informal learning. So definitely, a chapter on that.
A chapter I just wrote about for another publication is on Twitch culture and the culture of interacting in online streaming spaces and how culture emerges there. So I would say that social media is definitely one place, but now there's also streaming culture, and it's not just one way now, it's now an interactive space, and that probably should be touched on. They just made a new category on Twitch, by the way, like in the last 2 days. I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but it's called bathtub conversations. So the reason is Twitch has been wrestling with basically just chatting spaces and more social spaces, not just gaming spaces. And they had this whole emergence and this big controversy about people who were basically having conversations as if they were in a spa or a bathtub kind of thing. So they said, all right, we're going with it. So yeah, things are changing all the time.
All right. That's good to know. That's good to know. I want to come back to a comment from, I'm not sure if it's good or bad to know, but let's just go with it. I have, of my many children, one is 16. I don't think she watches Twitch anymore, but I was going to say, I should check on that. All right, back to the topic at hand. I also wanted to give you a shout out, or Dr. Whiteside actually gave you a shout out about your book. She is one of our first place award recipients, saying that she's going to recommend it. And thanks for the tip about Springer, even though it won't work for everyone. So another question then that I had, there's a lot in the book, right? As you mentioned, each chapter could be a book in itself. So how did you find a balance between the theories, the processes, and the solutions?
That definitely was a challenge. I think so we divided them into 2 sections, right? So we have 3 chapters in the theories and processes and 5 chapters in solutions. Initially, we actually had 12 chapters, then we decided to combine some. And so it's not 4 and 4, not even, because we have more solutions. And we were able to fit all the theories and processes into 3 chapters. Initially, we were going to go a little bit more deeper into, especially with the processes. We were like, should we write a chapter specifically for analysis, a chapter specifically for evaluation? But then we thought about the readers, and then we decided just to merge them all together. It's a lengthy chapter, but then, it's all there in chapter 3.
Yeah, I think it was a learner analysis, basically, where we said, who is going to read this? And we said, we want this to be the very first, these are going to be people seeing this for the first time. And with people seeing it for the first time, we decided to consolidate and reduce a little bit. And we also had an eye towards potentially a version of this for high school teachers and pre-service educators teaching high school teachers. So with that in mind, we kind of hit a happy medium.
That's very helpful. I appreciate that. I want to invite back in our first place award recipients who have joined us on video and talk a little bit more of the crossovers that we see. I know that some of you have to leave at the top of the hour, and so let me take this opportunity now to thank you for joining us today. We are going to continue on now talking about the two books together, and we'll start with putting one of the questions that we put to Drs. Martin and Betrus to our first place team. How are people able to get your book outside of, like ordering it at Stylus, for example? Is it available in ebook collections that would be typical of most libraries? Would each library have to secure it themselves? Do you even know?
I don't happen to know, maybe Amy or Karen knows, but I do know that Stylus has often made one chapter available on their website. I'm not entirely sure if it's still out there. And they have been really helpful. If we ever go to a conference and do a keynote, they'll put a chapter out there. And so they've been really helpful in that regard. The book itself, is in that 30 to 40 range, and with the 30% off, it's a pretty great deal for all the experts in there. But I don't have any more of an answer than that. Karen or Amy, do you know more?
I don't. I'll just say that at my institution in general, our distance ed librarians or our librarians in specific areas, sometimes they can get access to ebook funding better than they can get access to hard copy book funding. And so I know that for one of the classes I teach that's not related to online learning, but there's a book that I teach every semester, and other instructors who teach that foundational class use it every semester. And so they managed to get a kind of deal directly with the publisher to provide open ebook access to anybody who logs in through the library. So sometimes I find at my institution anyway, it's a public institution, that sometimes the funding's there for ebooks in the library that provide access to a larger population than necessarily any other kind of funding.
Mm-hmm. I have put in the chat again the information to both books, including the discount code that Dr. Whiteside mentioned for their book. So here's a question across the two books, and I'm gonna put it, I think, to Dr. Martin first, if you have a few minutes, since I know you have to leave. So we talked about social presence in the first presentation, and especially around remote learning from COVID-19 and the change that represented. And Dr. Martins and Betrus talked about the historical challenges in designing a book that includes technology and media that could be outdated as soon as you wrote it. So how do we design digital media to promote social presence in a sustainable way?
I think definitely possible. All our LMSs that we use these days have functionalities. I think more and more we are seeing that, just creatively you have to think about, we all do discussions, right? Asynchronous discussions, setting up some class cafes or student lounges, forums just for them to ask questions, or synchronous sessions, breakout rooms. I think, like moving away or setting time for those informal conversations along with the instructional conversations. So I think that is a way to do that. Again, I'm not an expert in COI, so you have the experts here, but we try to build that presence, right? Teaching online, one thing I've realized is when I moved from, I worked with Amy at UNC Wilmington, and when I moved to Charlotte, my biggest concern was we were asynchronous online, where while I was synchronous online in UNC Wilmington, will I get to know my students? That was my biggest concern. But then I quickly realized that it is possible if you do it the right way. It is definitely possible, even in an asynchronous online environment. You just design your courses to build in social presence in addition to the teaching presence and the cognitive presence. You make room for it, and you can definitely get to know the students. Students can get to know each other, and you can do it really well. And COVID has totally shown us that, right? It has shown us that there are all these well-designed effective classes, and then there are all these not so well-designed, quickly put together classes which may not be as effective. Matter of fact, we just got a meta-analysis on COI accepted with OLJ. So hopefully it'll come out soon. You all can see it. It shows the big picture. There has been meta-analysis on specific presences, but this one is a broad one. So hopefully you can see that it is important. So.
Thank you so much for that. I will flip it back over to Doctors Swan, Whiteside, Garrett Dickers, who would like to approach it from that more focused social presence side.
Well, I was just thinking, thank you, Florence. As Florence was talking, I think that the emergence of, as Amy mentioned as well, in the end of our book, we talk about how those what we thought were three separate lenses, technologically facilitated learner perception and critical literacy, kind of blended and go back and forth and connect in many ways. And I think about, Flippity and Flipgrid and VoiceThread and many of the tools and technologies that are out there that are being used in synchronous, asynchronous, face-to-face learning as well, that have that social component built in. And it's part of the tool. And so as our students get more used to having those tools when they can connect, even if it's asynchronously, and they can make a comment on someone else's video that someone else watches at some other time, those connection pieces are being built in more and more in the tools that we're using. And I think that shows that progression and the marriage of the two.
Great point. Great job referencing back to the book as well.
Yeah, I would also add, if I could, I think what Amy said is spot on. Is we need to not be driven by old paradigms and to be thinking about literacies and how what students need, driven by the pedagogy, and then move forward. We're seeing some interesting tools come forward that have this mix of social media, that have community building built into them. And I think there's going to be an exciting bunch of new tools and technology on the horizon. So I'm very excited about that. I think there's a bright future out there.
I think it's important to think about the functionality and not the tool, because really quickly the tools change. And if you know what you want the tool to do, you're a lot better off than if you think you have to have a particular tool. Right? At my institution, we just switched from Blackboard to Canvas. And one of the things I think that's really important for social presence is journaling. Canvas doesn't have a journaling tool. So I've had to build it out of discussions, but I can still get the functionality I want with a tool that might not be perfect. And I think it's important to think that way, just like it's important to think about pedagogy before technology.
Indeed. I want to call out Dr. Betrus. I was going to invite you to respond as well if you wanted to, but I want to call out your question if you'd like to in the chat, if you'd like to repeat that about looking for a tool for crosstalk.
Yeah, I think this is one that's kind of near and dear to my heart. I've kind of, over the last 15 months, really narrowed down what I feel synchronous Zoom fatigue is related to. And there's a lot of things. It's the screen, but I find more than anything, it's the cognitive stuttering that happens when you have to wait for somebody to finish talking before you start talking. But in a real conversation, you can start talking and pick up from where. So basically, high context cultures tend to seamlessly interact with each other and talk over each other in not an impolite way, but in a constructive way. And I think without that feature, I find it's exhausting. to do this because it's almost like talking on a walkie-talkie. So what we explored a little bit in the class, the Emerging Learning Technologies class, was VR tools that allowed for spatial audio and crosstalk so that you could have conversations and multiple conversations happening in a space where you could hear the tailing part of one conversation while you're engaged in another, the audio levels adjust, you can hear them all together. I haven't seen anything that allows you to do that, like with Zoom or Teams or any of the synchronous tools yet. And I was wondering if anybody had any pro tips on that. Yeah.
Audience, you are invited to throw your ideas out there as well. And if you're willing, noting that this recording will be available through the broader AECT. If you'd like to put your email address out there, perhaps someone who watches this later and couldn't watch it live might have a great idea and they could connect with you. I welcome all of our presenters to do that to the extent that you are comfortable. I know that some of you shared with me your social media handles as well. And I welcome you to post those as you would like.
Yeah, so I guess back to your original question, which was how are our tools emerging to give us, things that we need? I think we're starting to see limitation, which I think COVID was a stress test on what we're currently doing. And Florence was very right that the people who were poised in that space were ready for it. But at the same time, all of us got to push up against the boundaries of what we could and couldn't do and what we wanted to do. And I think all of us really were striving for social connectedness. And while there are many different ways you can pedagogically organize your discussion forums, and I've done all of them, there is a point where fluid conversation will move you in a way that it's almost like, yeah, I can use my butter knife to screw in my screw, right? But it really needs a screwdriver. And so that's the thing, is there's some times when the tools we're using are, like the journaling thing you're talking about. So I think that we can use our voices as authors, as an organization, AECT in general. We should be thought leaders in these spaces, and we should be pushing companies. They should be consulting with us about what functionality should be built into their tools. And we should be writing theoretically, not only about how to apply current tech with current situations, but thinking forward to how we might apply current tech to new situations or new tech to evolving situations. I mean, that's what we do, right? That's our job as an organization.
Well, talking about discussions, or as I like to say, discussing discussions is my jam. So I'd love to chat some more about that. I do have another question I would like you guys to consider. So Dr. Betchus, you were discussing your chapter 5 around simulations and games. And so I was wondering, again, for either team, what's the connection between games and social presence? And are we guessing, or do we know?
I'll punt on that one to the other group, because I'll bet games and simulations came up in their book. Haven't read it yet, but it is ordered.
I don't think we had a chapter that talked much about gamification, but I will say this, I think there are some exciting tools out there. I'm currently using YellowDig that has gamification built into it, along with the community building and the social media reactions, the likes and dislikes. And we're starting a study. I'm starting a study with a couple of colleagues on it right now. I don't know how much is out there on it, but I think we need more research in this area because it's an area that we don't know a lot about. I don't know how much it makes a difference, and I don't know in certain contexts if it stifles the conversation. Oh, I've reached my points. Do I stop? So it's a very interesting conversation, I think.
Have you ever watched kids playing games who are online with their friends, talking through exactly what they're doing? It gives you a good sense of what it might be like, because there's all kinds of social interaction around gaming that way. And perhaps we should take our cues from them in terms of what we want to build.
Yeah, and I'll just add, it's fascinating to me. I have a 9-year-old at home, and she watches other people play games on YouTube. And so I say to her, don't you want to play the game yourself? And she's like, no, I'm just going to watch them play. And then she'll go play and do her own thing. But she watches people have Minecraft competitions, and then she'll get her ideas about how to build her own Minecraft world. And then she'll build it and show me. And then she'll go back and watch them as they play each other's worlds. And that, I think, is something to think about capturing in the learning environment, to watch and engage in other people's learning experiences. I think about self-efficacy and vicarious experiences and mastery experiences, and really providing that open space for people at whatever point they're comfortable engaging in that learning. And maybe it is watching others do the learning or watching others engage in it that then helps them feel more comfortable and self-efficacious to be able to engage themselves.
Amy, that happens in stages too. If you've watched your daughter, and I have a couple of daughters myself, and in those spaces, you start off just observing, and then you build up confidence, and then you might interact in the chat. And then once you've interacted in the chat a little bit, you can gain points or credibility within that space. You can work your way up potentially, if you're really involved, to be a moderator of that chat where you're more involved, and then you can actually start your own stream at some point as well. So you've taught, those learning trajectory models we have with like the inbound and borderline, and I think that the online gaming community has taught us that there is a trajectory that starts with vicarious experiences but doesn't stop there. So when we observe kids watching people play video games and say, why are you just watching kids play video games? Shouldn't you be doing something yourself? We don't realize necessarily, unless you really pay attention, that that's just part of a trajectory, and they don't see that as an end necessarily. And it's completely within their control. And it also overlaps with that space that we all are really starting to realize is super important, is the informal learning space, right? That serendipitous informal learning. So yeah, I think we do have a lot to learn. If we just took the chat, right? If we're watching somebody do anything, and we just took that informal chat where we interact with each, I think conferences have started to do this with Twitter and back channels, right? So if you're at a session, they'll say the back channel for the conference is this. If you'd like to tweet about this live during the session, you do it. So we've started to pick up on it a little bit. And I think that's been at first I thought it was off-putting, where I'd look out in the audience and everybody's like hammering away on their phones as I'm talking. But then I'm like, you know what? That's just part of how it works. And they're doing a kind of a good thing.
I mentioned that I had a 16-year-old, and she has learned a great deal about playing her games from watching others. And here's the next layer is sometimes she wants me to watch with her as she's watching the games too, right? So I don't know where that fits in, but the informal learning is what really caught my attention. And I've been so impressed with the problem solving she has engaged in using a multitude of resources to solve her own game problems. And so, wonderful, wonderful work, really. And she's 16. I think games get a bad rap for our kids sometimes. That having said, yes, I've also been like, you have to do something else today. Have you drank? Oh, have you guys seen the ones where they have water breaks? So the YouTuber will stop and be like, water break. So I'm like, you can only watch one sitting. Thank you, Tony. If I move on to something a little more provocative, unless someone else has any questions, and that is, when you guys started writing your books, and I know that Dr. Betches just had to step away, I could see that. Who did you write the book for? Go way back to your first conversations. Did you mean to write a textbook? Did you mean it for students or practitioners, for everyone, for yourself? Who'd you write the book for? And we'll toss it over to our social presence folks first.
I'll jump in first, but I think that's a very good question, and I'm not sure I have the best answer for it. I just was so excited about social presence, and I saw the need so much that I was there must be a book here. And as Amy and I first started working on what is this thing, it really materialized when we had dinner. Gosh, I think that might have been in 2014, 2015 with Karen. And we talked about, well, we are thinking about social presence in very different ways. And Karen pointed out, rightfully so, that there was this sort of technology group, there's the learner perceptions, and then there was critical literacy. And so in fact, she did say, I think at that dinner, well, there's your book. So,
Excellent. That's a very good memory, by the way.
Yeah, I'll just say as well, I mean, I think I was thinking as Florence and Tony were talking too, what I appreciate about our book is we wanted it to be accessible to people who are just learning about social presence and not really knowing, all the details and the history and the trajectory, but then also to really spur researchers who have been doing or are doing social presence research or thinking about online learning to think about things maybe slightly differently, or to potentially take some recommendations or practices or aspects of the research that was presented and think about how we would further the conversation about what does social presence mean and how are we moving it towards the future. So I appreciate the way that the book is situated, that it does really give entry points into it for all types of people who are interested in learning about social presence, students, grad students in programs themselves, instructors, K-12, higher ed, industry professionals, researchers, scholars. I go back to the chapters. I was just writing an article submission, and I went back to some of the chapters in the second section to really pull out some of those tool pieces and technologically facilitated aspects to kind of talk about and flesh out in more detail too.
I got into it because Michael Moore asked me to look at it. And then he said, if you want to do it this way, you've got to get yourself into it. I think of it like the Blind Men and the Elephant, that I never thought it was all that different, but I thought that unless you understood the different perspectives, then you wouldn't understand the whole. So it was important for the field to be able to distinguish that. And it's really important for research to be able to define what it is you're researching so that people know where you're coming from. So I had no intention of writing a book. I really liked these women when I met them. So then it became more of a fun thing to do than a writing thing. I don't like writing particularly, believe it or not. So, but I think it's a really good book, and I'm really proud of it. So I think we did something worthwhile with it. And if I added that perspective part, I think it's important.
Thank you.
So we teased at this a little bit, and it started with a conversation of people who teach the class, quote, the class. The class is the multimedia class for our graduate students, right? Like, how do you develop and or integrate multimedia? And so that's where it started. And I give Bill Sugar a lot of credit for this, for kind of identifying the need and getting the ball rolling on everything. And then it kind of evolved into, well, is that the only group of people who are going to be looking at this? And then we said, well, if we write it for that class, how many classes like that are there in the world? Right? And we started to can we get past two hands and our fingers? And we're like, we got to be careful about this. And so then we said, you know what? More and more, this is being taught for educators, right? Like, educators are developing their own basic materials, even somewhat moderately complex materials. The tools are now so user-friendly, but the processes, the theories on how to use them are under-taught. So with that in mind, we kind of, that consolidation we mentioned earlier, we consolidated the information, wrote it in a deliberately approachable way for somebody new to the field, much like you did with your book, right? Is we wanted new people who've never seen this before to be able to understand it and grasp it. I know we all say that, believe it or not, when I was on the book project for the definition of educational technology, that was what the team said, is we want to write this one so that new people can understand it. And one of the first criticisms was, this is written for professionals and new people can't understand it. So I'd like to think that we did a better job with our book. I think based on what the reactions that we've had from our students using it, they, you see the light bulbs go off, right? Like it's one of those things where you know it as a teacher when the information hits them, it makes connections, they start sparking ideas, they communicate, and then it goes into the forums and they communicate it with their friends. The most robust discussions I've seen have been around the chapters. So it has served that purpose. It is working, and now it's just a matter of getting that information to more people's hands, maybe in a rewrite. Lawrence and I were talking about this, of the book in an even more consolidated way for high school, and an even more consolidated fastback potentially for elementary school teachers. So that's on our horizon. It's on one of those in infinite universe that will happen, but I don't know if it'll happen in this universe. But we would love it to.
I think you'll find, Tony, that elementary school teachers are really good at media because they come at the world that way, in a very visual way, or they won't be good elementary school teachers.
Yes, absolutely. So, but they tend to develop very granularly, like 5 to 10 to 15 minute chunks, right? So in the way we have to think about what we're doing, it's like a little, it has to be a staccato pace with elementary. My wife's a 4th grade teacher, so I hit her up all the time. And she's like, yeah, the attention span, you really have to deal with small chunks of information deliberately paced out throughout the day. So we would have to think about things a little differently, but the core principles would be the same.
Then I want to pose a 2-part question to close us up here a little bit. And that is, and you can talk about both combined or one or the other. We mentioned a little bit about what additional digital media would need to be talked about if you wrote a 2nd edition of the book on digital media. But so I'm wondering, one, what are your current or upcoming projects? I know we heard Dr. Martin say that her meta-analysis was going to be published, but what are your current projects or upcoming projects that you'll be working on? And then what would you include in a 2nd version of a 2nd edition of your book if one was printed? That might be in the form of lessons learned, as we talked about at the beginning of the meeting. Let's see. Let me toss it first to our social media folks. There's 3 of you and only 1 Tony. So we'll start with you. I'll give you each a moment to share your personal thoughts as well as what you think is the group of authors.
I'm currently working on something involving Carl Rogers and his personal education, person-based education, which works very well with social presence, but it maybe even takes it a further step because it's specifically designed to do those kinds of things. So right now we're just looking at content analysis of feedback. So the idea is that the way a lot of instructors really interact with their students is through feedback. So if you include those affective markers in the feedback, then conceivably you're going to make the interaction carry more weight, I guess is what it is. So I guess because I'm looking at that now, I would probably want to include that in a future book.
All right, thank you.
Oops.
Yeah, I mentioned a little bit briefly, a colleague and I at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, one of the good things of COVID is that if you're an online learning researcher, you all of a sudden have lots of questions you can ask and lots of people who are engaged in the middle of it, they might have something to tell you. So we were able last spring, when our institution shifted to remote learning, emergency remote learning, at the end of the semester, to ask our students who were very much traditional undergrad students at the university as a whole, who had very few online learning opportunities before that, to really talk to us about connectedness and to give us insight into instructors that they felt did a very successful job of keeping them connected in the middle when they shifted from what a traditional face-to-face environment was. And so that has continued. We had that initial survey and study that was published in the Online Learning Journal this past year. And then we built on that in the fall when our institution moved to a blend. We had some who were high flex, so teaching face-to-face and online at the same time, many who were online synchronous, some that moved into online asynchronous, and the only face-to-face option on our campus in the fall was half and half, basically half on Tuesday, half on Thursday in a socially distanced space, et cetera. So really, again, getting large scale student perceptions, but then we honed in specifically on those instructors who were identified as successful. And we interviewed them and asked them about their own experiences in shifting and then how that impacted their face-to-face teaching or their teaching in the fall. So we're in the middle of doing some data analysis with that. Followed up this following spring where we had continued into the kind of different modality pieces with another large scale survey of a representative population on campus to really get some more information into thinking about the connection between instructor connectedness and anxiety. I'm using a specific student instructor relationship scale for that. So there's a lot out there. We got a lot of data that's on my list of things to look through this summer and hopefully get out there this fall.
Whoa, that's a lot, Amy.
I know it's a lot. Thank goodness I've got a colleague who's really on it, kind of flying the plane, I guess, and I'm just his co-pilot.
That's important. Like Amy, I had the great opportunity of doing a university-wide instructor and faculty survey based on what happened, of course, in emergency remote learning and looking at social presence in that regard. Also looking at social presence in smaller case studies. We're looking at a comparative, separate comparative with an online math course that's 6 weeks versus 12 weeks and what worked well in terms of social presence and what didn't. Looking at a potential project with high flex learning in educational leadership, and the fourth study is on Yellow Dig, and actually more specific to what Tony was mentioning earlier, looking at gamification. My colleague is focused on the gamification part. I'm focused on the social presence part, and then there's the social media aspects of that as well. And we have a possibility of 1.5 year study on that. So there's no shortage of things to study for sure.
Absolutely, thank you. And someone earlier had asked in the chat about Yellow Dig, but I see that individual has needed to go. But since you, Dr. Whiteside, obviously have talked about that, if you want to put in a suggestion in the chat, or I can just post the link in there if they're able to see that if they view the recording, to let them know that we did see their question. All right then, Dr. Betches, do you want to share with us what it is you're doing?
Sure, I'll try to be quick. I know it's at the end and people are wanting to leave. But serendipitously, I had a conversation with Florence, and it was nice to get back together and talk with her. We hadn't spoken in a while. And she said, "What are you up to?" And I said, "What are you up to?" And she shared with me, and I'll share on her behalf, 2 projects she's working on related to a relatively hot topic in internet safety and digital citizenship. And it is in the chat now, so you can see those 2 links. So Florence is working on those pretty actively. She has a summer camp that she's doing in that space. And I think it stemmed out of some NSF work she was doing. And then it just so happens that I am an industry mentor on an NSF I-Corps team who's working on a cybersecurity education game for K-12 students. And we started talking and we're like, oh, so she started with the curriculum, my team started with the game, and we're sort of seeing, you know, if there's a convergence of sorts there. So that's one area that I'm working on. Another area is I've got a game called Teaching Bad Apples that I developed a few years ago, and I just partnered up with a company called Chatbox, or not Chat, yeah, Cardbox.tv. So Cardbox is a lot like Jackbox.tv. And if you know anything about Jackbox.tv, that's the one that does the Jackbox Party Pack on Steam and does the social games. So they are basically consolidating all the people who have independently developed Cards Against Humanity, teaching, you know, apples to apples style games into a platform where they can funnel them through. And so right now they're early. They're not sort of ready for prime time. This is like a startup, so we'll see where it goes. But it is exciting to see that they're on the Apple TV platform. They're about to be on Xbox, and they're working their way through Steam. So hopefully the Teaching Bad Apples game. So at the same time, I updated the Game Crafter website where we have the game, and I just put out our Overstuffed Deluxe Edition, which I'll put up in the chat if anybody's interested in Teaching Bad Apples. Real situations you can't believe are true, followed by add fuel to the fire responses. So that has been a passion of mine for a few years, along with my co-creators. A couple of other things. I have a chapter on Twitch culture and esports that I mentioned. I did a TED Talk on esports a couple of years ago that has been pretty well received, and I'm trying to follow up with staying in touch with that culture. And I got to tell you, as a Gen Xer, it is hard to keep up with internet culture. So I have a lot of police would call them informants. I have a lot of informants in that space that really helped me out with my writing. And this informant was an undergraduate named Colin Michaud, who is a streamer himself. And he actually, I told him, if you write this well enough, you can be first author. And he knocked it out of the park. And I think it's going to be a fantastic chapter in a book that Hannah Gerber is coming out with. So I'm really excited for him, especially that he sort of pushed this through, not as part of a class, no credit, no money. He just did it. Was really proud of him. So well done, Colin, on that. And then Mike Melenda was just in the chat, and every 10 years I do a state of the pre-service introductory technology course for teachers that's published usually in Tech Trends. It was published in 2012, based on the 2000 and 2010 studies. I repeated the study last fall, and we hope to get it published in 2022 to show the trends in that course. So that's what's been keeping me busy. Aside from typical stuff like updating your graduate program and, you know, keeping up with the Joneses, so to speak. We did move our graduate program. This is kind of big news. Our instructional design and educational technology program is moving to fully online, and we are wrestling with exactly the problems you're talking about. The first thing we talked about is how do we build community and social presence in our online space so that it compete with other programs and surpass them. And so we are actively engaged in that. So that's why I bought your book, and I'm very excited to read it and apply it to our graduate program. So thank you.
Well, that's an excellent way to wrap it up, Dr. Betrus. Thank you. Thank you very much. Are there any last parting words from anyone? Thank you, Dr. Whiteside, for putting that in the chat. Thank you also, Dr. Betrus, for putting information about the game website that you were just talking about in the chat so everyone can connect it. Let me again thank everyone who has attended today's showcase for our 2020 Book Awards. The 2021 awards will be announced in June and then recognized at this year's conference. I also want to thank our support from the Division of Distance Learning Board, particularly Beth Oyarzin for her work in marketing and creating the background that we're using today, as well as the marketing image. Dr. Sadaf, our president, was in earlier before she had to leave. And of course, more than anything, I thank you, our presenters, and our participants and audience for joining us today. And I want us to give one more round of applause to all of our award recipients. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. Goodbye.